And the big gap in the market isn't that we've got a lack of that. It's a communications and expectations problem.
Welcome to the Cybrary podcast.
Well, welcome back.
Welcome back.
Welcome back.
Welcome.
Welcome back.
Welcome.
Well, welcome back.
Welcome, everybody. I'm Ryan Corey, CEO and co-founder of Cybrary, and I'm excited for you to join us on today's episode. Let's jump in.
Hi, and welcome back to another episode of the Cybrary podcast. I'm your host, Mike Gruen, VP of Engineering and CISO here at Cybrary. And today we're joined by Michael Skelton from BugCrowd to discuss skills gap and in the space, whether it exists or doesn't, and hopefully have some fun with the topic. I'll let Michael introduce himself and give a little background.
Yeah. Okay. Michael, I work for BugCrowd, so run the security operations team there. Been a top 20 hunter on that platform, ex-penetration tester for NCC Group before that. And other than that, just native to the space for a while now, I guess.
Cool. Do you really briefly want to maybe talk about what BugCrowd does?
Yeah, so we're the first bug bounty platform. So essentially, researchers have access to a range of websites through us. And so they can find bugs in them, they report them to us, and we work with the company behind it, remediation and things like that, to see it resolved, and the researcher gets paid for their efforts. So researchers' role in that essentially being that of the hacker. We're the mediator in between, and we also onboard the customers through that.
Yep. And full disclosure, Cybrary is a customer. I'm the primary, me and Jonathan Myers, primary beneficiaries of it. We really love the platform. We've been using it now for a year, and it's been great. Really helped us find some things that we might not have found otherwise, and helped us also just deal with the barrage of things that come in all of the time. So I find it really helps us get through our day and our week in a very efficient way, rather than having to deal with all the triaging ourselves. So definitely love the platform. And today we wanted to discuss sort of skills gap in the IT cybersecurity space. I know Cybrary recently put out a report about the skills gap, and we were talking to Michael, and he has some really interesting ideas on the topic, and we figured we'd go ahead and record it and have a conversation about it.
Yeah, the controversial stance, I guess. I still feel. I mean, we spoke about this in February. I still feel that there's not so much a skills gap as there's an expectations gap. And you can make arguments that there's skills gap at the top, and I hear that one a lot. Reality being there's far less roles that need those caliber of people, and there's so many roles still that need broad spectrum knowledge. But I mean, there's somewhat of a bias being in the space that I'm in, being bug bounties. We see so many talented individuals. However, I still think that there's a big gap between knowledge of those managing and running those teams and what they need in those teams, which creates this perception of a skills gap, not so much because there's a skills gap in the people that they need in the team, but there's a skills gap in the management that's orientating and building those teams.
No, I think that definitely resonates. I know we talked here with Josh Lospinozo probably a couple months ago about similar things in the military, where the people who are sort of in charge of the programs, not having the technical background, not really understanding the space, and then having problems, sort of getting the right people into the roles, knowing what the role is. And I think that definitely translates. I think there's a lot of similarities there that we probably see in the private sector. I do think that it's true in almost all the tech jobs. As a software engineer, I know I've had managers over the years who have had varying degrees of technical capability and really understanding what they need from a software engineering perspective, whether it's because they just didn't have an engineering background and they're more of a quote unquote manager, and therefore they don't really know the skills or the space. Or if it's, for the more technical ones, they definitely knew sort of what they wanted, but not necessarily in the most modern of terms. So I think there's a lot of what you're saying resonates. In terms of the what you think of as an expectation gap, though, what can you maybe elaborate on that? What do you sort of mean by that?
Well, I guess there's two things. One is knowing, expecting where you can find people. So most security people aren't looking on typical job boards for a role. They're achieved through networking. And that's still very much the point we are in with the cycle. And you see some people hear that, and then they'll go and approach that by looking through isolated channels for their role. And then they wonder why they have a gender bias in their team, because they haven't broadened their horizons by, expanding across multiple mediums and partnering with different groups like WISP and other things to fill those roles. But then the expectations gap also comes into play when, you're putting up, they must have CEH and CISP and all these other things, that then you flip that into community. There's an aversion to particularly CEH being something that's more detrimental than enhancing to your career. So you're not going to apply for those places that are looking for it. So that creates a bit of a gap in the market, essentially, where those who consider themselves passionate about security look at those as something that won't help and would hinder them. And then there's some people who are hiring that are like, oh, well, US government requires CEH, so we're going to require CEH, not realizing that there's a total gap in market there that they're creating.
No, that makes sense. I think when I was looking for a job again, I can only relate as a software engineer looking for positions, but definitely seeing the same things where when I look at a job description, looking at what they're requiring and then thinking, well, is that really what they need? Or is this just what's been written down because it's being copied and pasted from some other thing, or because the person doesn't really know, or whatever the case may be. And I think, I have an interesting, when it comes to like certifications, I think a lot about them in terms of, what are they actually offering? What are they bringing? And, I know a lot of people put a lot of stock in them. Other people don't. I don't think that there's a right answer or a wrong answer. I think it depends on what you need and what the requirements are. I think that certifications have a lot of value in terms of, showing the dedication to a topic area to go through the process of getting one. Sort of similar in engineering to just having a shorthand where we all know we're all using the same terminology to talk about the same things, which makes the team just operate more efficiently and things along those lines. And so I think that there's some benefits to certification from that perspective, but at the same time, there's any number of people who've just been doing the job and have been doing it for, and understand the concepts and haven't bothered to get the certification. And by requiring certifications for certain jobs, you're really sort of turning off a whole lot of people.
I think the interesting thing in our space is that it also, you expand it further. What certifications you do kind of become indicators of, how exposed you've been to the space. So if someone, there's correlations that get drawn from it fairly or unfairly. And I'm not saying that I'm holding this bias, but I can see it in the majority of communities. So like, if someone's just done a CISP, then you kind of assume, oh, they're more GRC, they're more management orientated. They haven't gone too technical. If someone's just done a CEH, nothing else, you go, oh, okay, they're looking for the quick wins. They're still quite new in their career. They haven't, and likewise, if someone's done OSCP, you're like, okay, so they want to be a pen tester. And so that doesn't mean that that's correct, but you flip that to the other side of the argument. You see a role, so you get that bias picked up through Twitter and osmosis of hanging out with, networking events and other things. Those are the biases that exist. Someone then creates a job advertisement. They're like, oh, well, we're just looking for CEH. They look like they don't take security very seriously, or that there's a gap there. Or if they go, oh, look, we're looking for CISP and we're looking for CISM and things like that, it's like, okay, they're looking for a manager with a GRC focus. And that may not actually be what the role is, but that's inherently what they're communicating with the position description. And so it could be that, hey, they actually need someone internal who's going to help out in the SOC. And there's just been a gap created along the way with the wrong job advertisement being lifted into that. And I think we have all these nuances, particularly around certification and what they mean, that create, this gap in expectations again, that coming back to that then the wrong kinds of people apply for that role, which makes it look like, oh, well, we can't get someone for that SOC, but you're actually signaling out to market, to those kinds of people, we're more interested in something else. So.
Yeah, and I also think that certifications aren't skills. That's just
correct. Yeah, definitely.
It's just a big bundle of related topics that you know or don't know or know to some extent, whatever. And I think when I think about skills, I really do think about it much more fine-grained. And I think technology is allowing us to get to that point now where we're able to provide smaller bite-sized skills and assess people's abilities in those areas and maybe have a more rich conversation. Whereas in the past, you can't, when you're looking for a job, when you're a hiring manager, right? You can spend a lot of time yourself trying to, let's say you're an expert in the field and you really do know what you're looking for, trying to do those networking, trying to scour LinkedIn, do all the sourcing is time consuming. It's a full-time job. And one of the easiest ways to deal with that full-time job is to get a technical recruiter involved. And so now you're talking about this certifications becoming a shorthand way of communicating to that technical recruiter things that you're looking for, because there's no way you're going to be able to get into the nitty-gritty weeds of the exact skills that you're looking for. And in fact, I find it very difficult to communicate those skills. Usually when I put together a job description, it's usually more about the type of work you'll be doing and the types of problems we're going to be solving. And then when I'm looking at resumes, that's what I'm looking more at. And I think it's really hard for someone who's not an expert in the space to put it all together, right? To be able to look through resumes and identify, oh, this particular topic is related, or this problem that they solved here is applicable, or you can abstract it to this other, to the problems that you guys are trying to solve.
And I think on that, there is something to be said for there's recruiters in the space coming up that specialize in security, because they'll understand how to communicate with you to pull out what they need to create the potential positioning. And we're seeing them now at conferences. We're seeing them presenting at conferences and networking. And so they know those other avenues where they can reach people. And some of them are very effective at that. I think that's probably one way that the market essentially is correcting itself in terms of, there's opportunity there for recruiters who know how to work our space, and they're doing quite well with it.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think, before we started recording, you and I were talking a little bit about the similarities in the software engineering space. And the same was true there, right? In the early days when I was hiring engineers and I was dealing with recruiters, for the most part, most of the recruiters were sort of, even the technical ones were still fairly generic. And then you start getting into, I really enjoy working with the smaller boutique type recruiters who have people who specialize in certain roles. And yes, they can't do the job, but they've spent the time learning and talking to enough people that they know what the role is, and they can sort of put things together, and they can ask the right questions, and they can come back and ask me the right questions of like, hey, this candidate has this skill. Does this apply to what you guys are doing? And they actually learn. And I think you're right. I think the market is correcting itself similar. It's a few years behind maybe where software engineering was. I think it's a great opportunity.
And that's it. A good recruiter both knows how to filter the candidates as well as how to tease out of the company exactly what they're looking for. So,
yep. And I think, you mentioned it earlier, the sort of expectation of like, if I put up the job descriptions, like even non-software engineering positions, security positions, any number of things, almost every hire that I've made has been through some sort of internal referral or recruiter, because putting jobs up on job sites, it's very difficult to get the right applicants. It's very difficult to communicate. It's difficult for them to understand the role.
I think the challenge we face there is that because this is how things run, is that where it feeds that bias of, teams that are dominant with one type of person. And so the biggest challenge there is how do you avoid that positioning? So making sure that, you're not using a recruiter that's just going to the same sources and the same book, like, mentioned before, like talking to areas like WISP and things like that. So like when we hire, we've got some people in the company that can put our jobs in other areas that allow us to get more diverse applicant pools. And so I think that software engineering suffers this badly too. A very male-dominated field that, same as you're saying, like very networking-orientated hiring. That's okay, but we have to be cognizant that that's not the only thing we should be doing. And I think that presents its own unique set of challenges in terms of if dealing with a recruiter, making sure that they're not using the same playbook over and over, essentially.
Yeah, I agree. I think, right. And I think on the networking side, what's interesting is if you can do it once, then you have the network to sort of continue to do it and continue to build. Like if you can get those inroads into those various places so that you do it, once you start having diversity, it's sort of easier to get it going, but it's very hard to get it going if you don't have it. I don't know if that makes a ton of sense.
It does, but it's also being like remaining aware of it as well. Because the only way that you get it started is by making conscious effort to correct it in the first place. Particularly given, like, as we're saying, it's such a networking orientated field, you consciously need to make changes there to support that moving forward. Even if it, essentially it's not, if you're in the point where there is that bias there already, and because of the way this field hires, it's going to be very difficult to dig your way out of that, but you need to focus on it to essentially position yourself better for the future.
Absolutely. And I think, one of the other things is, and it gets back to just sort of skills in general, the real skill, and it's the skill that I look for, is the ability to learn, to adapt, to overcome the great, all of the other sort of things. What you've done in the past, or what is far less important to me. That just implies to me, how quickly am I going to get a return on my investment? Am I putting you into a role that you can hit the ground running on day one and everything there is to know about this topic? Or is this sort of new, whether it's a new skill, new technology, new whatever, but I feel totally confident that you're going to be able to pick this all up and adapt and now it's just a matter of how long is it going to take? And I think that's the other thing that gets overlooked a lot of times when you're looking for a candidate is you're so focused on, I want somebody with these skills. It's like, well, it doesn't really matter. I just need to know that they understand these general concepts and know how to apply them and can sort of abstract things and take lessons learned. And I think that's another area where, we could probably be doing better, is really making sure that we're giving people the chance to show that they can learn these things and that they can do the job rather than just looking at what they've done.
I think the interesting thing I've kind of come around to realizing too, and wish I realized sooner, is that because I as well, I used to run a software dev team. So software dev teams, you really care about raw technical skill, and probably less. I mean, to be fair, it's probably changed. It's 6 years-ish since I did that. Security, I really care about good communicators as well. To really champion security, particularly like we're talking with researchers, we're talking with customers, but the same if you're in a blue team and you're talking with the business. People that can communicate well are those gems that if someone's able to emphasize, hey, like I know how to talk business, or I know how to break down security concepts in non-technical fashions. That's the thing that I think is most valuable to me, as opposed to I have these 10 certifications over here. And that is what, this is why people say write a blog, right? And this is where things have gotten broken down over time and miscommunicated. One of the reasons people say write a blog if you want to break into security isn't to write a blog showing all of the CVEs that you found. It's to write a blog showing the CVEs you found explained in a way that someone who's not as intimately familiar with that can understand it, and showing that you're able to break down the concept in a way that communicates it properly. And I think that's ultimately where that's so important in a hiring manager or someone who's heading up the role as well, to essentially be able to understand and emphasize the security problem in those job roles, that sometimes that ends up creating that miss when, there's a communication problem there that's kind of become endemic through the team because of that.
No, that's, Yeah, I think that I never really thought about that way, but it makes a lot of sense. I think being able to explain also the why, the what's behind this, because so much of what security isn't fixing this thing or identifying this thing, or it's being able to, as I said earlier, abstract it. But then also, just because you've been able to abstract this concept, you need to be able to explain it to other people so that they can either avoid making the same mistake or understand it at a different level than just that specific instance of it.
Well, sometimes it's just explaining the need to fix it, right?
Well, there's that too, right? The why, right?
Yeah, like in security, there's things that we understand why they're a risk, but if you only explain them from a technical concept, someone will be like, "Oh, well, why do I care about that?" Like it's even positioning of a bug. Like you present someone with a alert 1 XSS, you're like, "Oh, look, it's XSS." I mean, there's no connection to the problem, as opposed to connecting them with, "Oh, this is an account takeover based XSS. If I send you this link, I'm going to get control of your account." The communication of the same bug, even though more effort in one payload versus the other, completely changes the context of how quickly that's going to get fixed and how the business is going to put momentum behind it.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. So being able to explain the why behind it, I definitely agree. I think is an important part, being able to really get into being able to explain it in that way. It's funny. It reminds me very early on in my career, having a meeting with a customer. I was doing software development, and we were building a 2 features for them. One was gift certificates, and one was the ability to have a coupon, a 10% off coupon. And the requirement was, we want 10% off coupons that are valid on everything. And I was like, valid on everything but gift certificates, right? And they're like, no, you should be able to get 10% off on this gift certificate. I was like, and then I had to take the step of you do understand that you're allowing people to print money at that point. Like that's if I can, and it took a little while, and I think I was very early in my career, so probably the way in which I communicated could have been more effective, rather than saying that's the stupidest thing I've ever. No, I don't think I said that.
Just to catch that, that's
right.
The main mistake people make early in security is the emotive response, right? Is treating the customer or the internal person as if they're stupid for not seeing our perspective, even though they specialize in one thing and we specialize in another.
Right.
That gap is so common. And I think that when I say someone's ability to communicate, I don't mean someone's ability to bully something through. I'm not saying you're doing that though. I mean someone's ability to have someone emphasize with their position in a way that makes sense for all parties. So
yeah, definitely, and I was joking. That's why.
Oh, totally. No,
exactly. Right, and that's why I was customer facing. But I think it's similar to when I look for. There's different types of engineers, and back in when I worked at professional services, there was software engineers that we were hiring that were going to be customer facing, and that was a very different engineer than the engineer who was maybe just writing code, because you knew when you put them on that call, the customer would hear their eyes rolling through the phone. Like there was no way they could just control themselves, and having that presence of mind of knowing, no, I'm dealing with a person. I need to communicate this in a way, right? We all have our specialties. This obviously got through several layers of requests before it got to me, and I sort of picked up on it. So I think that's you're right. It's an important part is having that presence to be able to explain it and not just have that knee-jerk reaction of, oh, you're dumb, or how could you make that mistake?
And the challenge too is then you force someone to take a position. If you push them on the emotive aspect and you fail, they'll take a position that becomes much harder to work with.
Right.
And the reality is sometimes we're wrong too. Sometimes we see things as security risks that in the context of the business is considered an acceptable risk. And then this is
actually a perfect example of that, because I said, hey, so you I don't know if you realize this, but if you allow people to use a 10% off coupon on a gift certificate, then, they can buy, gift certificates and use that money to buy more gift certificates. And in the end, and the business person on the other side of that conversation was like, yeah, but we're willing to accept that risk. And it's like, wait, why? And they said, well, it takes so long for us to ship out. We actually had to physically ship the gift certificate and physically ship the coupon, that the time at which this promotion was only going to be going for so long, that they sort of calculated that the chances of anybody figuring it out and getting that much, it wasn't going to cost them that much money. And I was like, all right, if that's the risk you want to. And in the end, I don't think they, we monitored it. We watched for the scenario where people were buying gift certificates with gift certificates, and we didn't see it. So in the end, it paid off. It was a short, I'm sure if we had allowed that promotion to go on for a long enough period of time, or if they had a faster shipping process, fulfillment process, where it was the coupons were arriving in email or something along those lines. So, right, it allowed us to have that conversation. And they deemed it as low risk.
Awesome.
Exactly. Hey, all right. I guess we're done here. So I think, you also mentioned sort of channels and where you're looking for people. And I think that's an interesting problem as well in the space. I think it's a problem in any space really, is that the people that are happy in their job are generally not looking for jobs. And so how do you find people who they might be open to a position? They're not necessarily not looking. They're just not actively searching. And so, that networking helps a little bit, but there's, I think that security in particular is one where you really do need to be involved in the community to find the right people. That as long as you're on the outside, it's really hard to just sort of get at people from around the edges. I'm curious what your thoughts are.
I mean, part of it, we built a student program. So we talked about this in February that we're intending to do it. We've done it quite successfully. So, and when I say built a student program, we didn't. So a bit of context there. I run a series of community repos on GitHub. One of those tracks companies with student intake programs. And I tried to verify them one day. I was like, okay, I'm going to try and find people that went through those student programs. And what I found in doing that is that the majority of companies saying they have student programs either don't do it and they just have it as a customer signal. They say they do it, but they don't. Or they do it, but they expect someone to, come in and hit the ground running day one. They don't have any support or build up. They just throw people in the mix and good luck to you. So we actually hired Hack Luke Stevens, so someone who'd done a fair bit and was passionate about teaching in the space, security-wise, to full-time look after these students and build them up. And then we also didn't say, oh, you have to have graduated. We actually went and hired part-time people that were still studying because they had such a passion for the space, and giving them that shot was such a great way to essentially let them hit the ground running. And we, instead of throwing them at everything, made sure we built ways of properly monitoring and controlling what kind of work would come in to allow us to build them over time. So we could say, start them on very low tier kind of quick check and noise reduction type work. And as they acquired more skill and gave us proof points that acquired skills, build them up. And also making sure we're regularly building them up in that. So that's actually a pretty good inlet for then you build that team. You've then got that team to hire from for other roles. So my capacity planning for next year takes into heavy consideration hiring out of that group. And the best thing about going from a student angle is that from a diversity point of view, it's much easier to fulfill that need than it is to go for someone that's been in the space for 5 years, because this industry is still, the 5-year cycle in this industry is a pretty biased one, for lack of a better way of putting it. And so it's allowed us to tick a lot of boxes in that. And then, beyond that, like for Luke's hire, that was a networking approach. That was a very specific hire where we needed someone who was very passionate about looking after and teaching students. That's not a hire we can easily market for. So that one came from networking and knowing, who's someone who's doing this already that would like to do this in a professional context. So, we kind of have both in the mix. By virtue of being as big a company as we are, it does make it easier to hire, but it also makes it easier to get inundated in noise. And so we do, get pretty specific with that. We still put up job adverts and things like that. But, I look to, student intakes and other things as ways that we can build our team, not just from a numbers on seats point of view, but also from different viewpoints, like having that kind of the way I guess I would emphasize it is the morale of the team is better having people that are in that part of their journey than just people who are old and worn down, I guess. Not
curmudgeons.
No, like you get a bias, you get an inherent like, oh, everything is broken over time in security versus someone who's at the beginning of the journey who's like, no, this is awesome. You can do that. And I love that like balance that we've kind of brought in terms of people that are new to the space and passionate about it versus people that have been around for a while. And they're like, yeah, of course you can do that. I love that like morale shift that comes with that.
Yeah, no, there's definitely a sense of enthusiasm you get out of people that are newer in the field and that excitement as they learn and explore and uncover things. I think that's amazing. And I think, when I think about what Cybrary is trying to, do with, our career development platform and provide training, especially for businesses on the entry level side of things and, all the way through people's careers. But I think it definitely, there's something there. And I know we, as someone who's run technical teams, one of the areas I've always struggled is bringing in really junior people or like sort of that student and knowing that making that investment, because it really is an investment. There's a lot of time you have to spend in that. And I've, whether it's internship programs or student programs or whatever it is, you really need to put a lot in, which means you want to have a big enough population of people going through it to sort of, so you're pulling out of there. And I think that's And that's an area that I think, a lot of companies can probably afford to make that investment in, and then others have to find other solutions because it is, it's very difficult.
Well, I think if I was to do it in a smaller company, I'd take some of the lessons of that. So I would still make sure that there's at least one person who's not begrudgingly taken on this responsibility of training them, but it's passionate about training them as their key mentor. Like the main thing is having a key mentor that, and not having the expectation that they're going to handle everything out of the gate, because that's going to lead to quality issues for the business and stress for the candidate. Right. So it's, having, and we haven't got this right. We're still refining this part. And this is the hardest part to solve is how do you ramp them up into a full role? What kind of timeline do you ramp them up into a full role? But not trying to rigidly set that at the beginning of that, but setting that over time as you see, we have different people in different points of that cycle because people learn at different paces and learn in different ways. That doesn't mean one person's better than someone else, just that they might be a better communicator where someone else is better technically. So we give them more technical things and we put the better communicator on more sensitive items in terms of that context. So having that, flexibility to go, okay, we're going to put this person at the head of it and we're going to adjust over time, and being a bit more reactive than proactive to that program purely by virtue of, it is such an unpredictable space that pre-planning everything doesn't really work out.
Yeah. And I think part of that program, at least the way we handle it here, is, looking for the training. Cause trying to get a junior person and putting them into a role where they actually have to ship something, where there's some sort of critical thing that you're having them work on is difficult, creates stress. It's and then there's this tendency of the more experienced members of your team just saying it's screw it, I'm going to do it. We need to get it done. We don't have time for this. And not that they're being mean or whatever. There's just, we know the sort of business needs. And I think, so whenever I have the sort of, whether it's an internship program or whatever that I'm running, it's always about like, what projects can we identify that are going to have high value, high interest, that if they get done, everybody's going to be like, wow, I can't imagine what it was like before we had this. And at the same time, aren't like mission critical problems that like the business isn't like, when is this going to get done? I need it yesterday. And so I think one of the things that we've been able to do is supplement a lot of those projects, because there's not a lot of those projects, and being able to supplement that with more on-demand training and other things so that we can make sure that the more junior people are getting those opportunities to learn things in sort of these safe environments. I'm curious, if you have similar experiences.
Yeah, I mean, we're lucky in the sense that our work stream breaks apart very elegantly to different skill levels because of that. Simply, like a P5 issue is a P5 issue that you can, versus a P1, you wouldn't put a student on a on a P1, for example. That takes, and we can break apart our tiering model of our team around that pretty elegantly. But that model cross applies to other parts of security. So, a SOC with an escalation pathway can design and develop similar ways of breaking apart work. They may need to have some other controls around it that we don't have, and it's probably going to look completely differently, but it's achievable still. Likewise, pen testing, as long, the mistake I've seen with pen testing with students is expecting them to do the full engagement, which I don't think is right for the person doing it, for the company that's hosting it, or for the customer, especially so for the customer. But that's not to say that you can't use student programs in pen testing where you've got a shadow arrangement or, a mentoring arrangement. Like shadowing I would say, be the best way, but it isn't the most cost-effective way of doing it, but is the best way to build people. So there's definitely other ways that other companies can employ the same.
Yeah, it's funny. The shadowing is basically how I got my skills, but it wasn't shadowing I was the customer shadowing the companies that we had hired to do the various things. And I was just shadowing them and learning what they were doing so that I could learn. And so that, for various reasons, both because I was curious and also so we could avoid it and all sorts of things. So I definitely agree that shadowing is it's hard for me to argue with what worked for me. But, I think it's a slightly different thing when you're talking about, having a company and then saying like, oh yeah, we know that we're sort of, this person's going to be shadowing this other person. And, back in the 90s, it was pair programming was a big thing. And like, wait, we're paying two engineers to do the job of one. I don't understand. It's like, no, you're making an investment in this other person who's going to be able to take on more responsibility over time.
I think it's a correction we need to see in the pen testing model in general. Like is shadowing, it's such a useful tool, in terms of put two people in the job, see where they perform and see what, have them trade knowledge and skill sets more directly. I mean, the most enjoyable engagements I did at NCC Group were when we had multiple people on the job. We'd collab, we'd talk techniques, and we'd learn from each other and we'd feed from each other. The broader reality of pen testing is that it tends to be single, you're on a job, go get it done and spit out the report. And I think that creates it's created silos in the industry in terms of, if you're the best pen tester today, you're not going to be the best in 5 years if you're not continually and regularly exposing yourself to new skills and techniques. And one of the ways you can continually expose yourself is to shadow with people that are, like, if I was put on a Ruby on Rails project today, I'm going to be a bit out of my depth, but I could get put on with someone who's like been recently deep dive it, skillful, and they can crash course to me. Just because I haven't been pen testing for a few years, there's going to be things there and to the point, I don't know what the new things are there. I'm sure I could do well on the engagement, but I could do better if I was paired with someone that's been studying that recently.
And I think it also helps with that, what you were talking about earlier about communication, right? If you have someone, if they're actually paired and shadowing each other, or one shadowing the other, then they actually have to communicate back and forth about what's going on and explain it. And I think that helps, as opposed to when you're one man team or one person team and you're just sort of going through it and just documenting and checking boxes, as opposed to actually having that communication with someone. And I also find having junior people on the team asking me like, well, can you explain that to me, helps me to better not just understand, but potentially even find other things I wouldn't have thought of, just because I have this other person who's asking these questions that maybe I took for granted or didn't really think through or whatever it is.
To share a bug with someone more directly who's like, it's fun to share a game-breaking bug with a customer, but it's even more fun to share it with a peer that really understands what you've done.
Right.
Like if you've completely busted something to pieces because you've just gone down this rabbit hole for like 8 hours, and for them to go, oh, wow, that's a lot of work. Like for them to just connect with it on a different perspective, where the customer's like, oh yeah, this is just what you guys do,
right. Or even the manager. I mean, the fact is, I have several friends who will just, send me a message or do something that's like, hey, you're the only person I know that's really going to appreciate this. Right. It's like, right. Their boss, and from their boss's perspective, they're like, hey, yeah, thanks. It seems like you're just doing your job. Like, they just don't get what it took to actually identify what was going on here.
Yeah. And I think that ultimately leads people to drive themselves more as well. Like, if you're in a position where you can share that with your peers, then you're going to be a lot more driven to do that in the first place, as opposed to just completing the engagement. So,
right. Cool. Well, I've definitely enjoyed the conversation. Any final thoughts or anything else you wanted to talk about?
No, I think we've covered quite a lot. I think it's gone quite well. So it's always a more controversial of topics, but I guess I do genuinely believe there are incredible amount of talented individuals, and the big gap in the market isn't that we've got a lack of that. I think we've got a lack of, it's a communications and expectations problem. Both candidates not fully knowing how to communicate what they can do to businesses and to get in front of them, and businesses not knowing how to communicate what they're looking for, that leads itself to present as if there's a skills gap. But I believe it's more that everyone's kind of talking past each other. So.
All right. Well, yep. I think that's definitely a contributing factor. I have my sense is that somewhere there's a lot of that going on, and there's
degrees
also a lot
for sure.
Right. There's just needs as more and more companies just need cybersecurity professionals that never needed it before. There's just more jobs being created and more roles that need to be filled. And there's definitely this talking past each other and not really understanding what those needs are. And there's probably the people out there that are able to fill them that just aren't getting the looks that they deserve.
Yeah, and I guess to elaborate, that also breaks back to where we're talking about like creating student opportunities and things like that. Like, talking past each other is also businesses not realizing, you don't have to go for that number one person every time that's going to knock it out. Sometimes you need to build pathways to build someone into being that person. And I think we don't do enough of that as an industry.
I don't think we have the patience in a lot of cases. We're looking for the quick fix.
Yeah, we're a begrudged cost center that still hasn't learned how to emphasize to the business the need for investment. So
that's a great way of putting it. Well, thanks so much for joining us. Always a pleasure to talk to folks from BugCrowd. I enjoyed meeting you and look forward to talking to you again in the future.
Thanks, man. Cheers.